Good evening, everyone. Welcome to 52 Living Ideas. Sharikant Kant had a family emergency, so I will be filling in for him. We're going to start with the Gita, chapter 13, and we're going to go as far as we possibly can. We're going to start with chapter 13, verse 1 to 6. And David, whenever you're ready, you can start reading. And then Yogeshwar will give his commentary.
Certainly. Thanks very much, Evanik. So chapter 13 of the Bhagavad Gita, verse 1 through 6. Arjuna said, "O Krishna, I wish to understand this material energy, the individual consciousness, the field of activity, the knower of the field of activity, knowledge and the goal of knowledge." Lord Krishna said, "O Arjuna, the material body is known as the field of activity. Those who know this describe those who know this as knowers of the field of activity." O Arjuna, certainly knowing me as well within all bodies as the knower of the field of activity, such knowledge of the field of activity and the knower of the field is actual knowledge, in my opinion. Hear in brief from me about that field of activities. Also, what kind of nature it possesses, what transformation it produces, from whence it was born, and from what is its influence. In a unique manner, it has been sung in many ways by various sages, by the Vedic hymns, by various aphorisms of Vedanta, with its sound logic and reasoning, and by conclusive evidence. The major elements of earth, water, air, fire, and ether, the false ego, spiritual intelligence, the unmanifest element in material nature, the lens, the 10 senses along with the mind, and the 5 objects of the senses of sound, sight, taste, touch, and smell, desire, disdain, happiness, distress, the perpetual faculty of the mind, determination. All this is declared to be the field of activities modified by the 6 transformations of the physical body, beginning with birth and ending with death. Sorry, I went through 7, but the translation was written as 6 and 7 together.
Okay, thank you so much. Yogeshwar, whenever you're ready.
अथ त्रयोदशोऽध्यायः श्रीभगवानुवाच इदं शरीरं कौन्तेय क्षेत्रमित्यभिधीयते एतद्यो वेत्ति तं प्राहुः क्षेत्रज्ञ इति तद्विदः. Krishna is now telling Arjuna about the Kshetra and the Kshetrajna. To put it in simple terms, Kshetra is a place in which all the work or all the action is done. And then Kshetrajna would be the one who is doing the action. So we could put it in a way that Kshetra meaning space, the space in which all the work is done. Whether it is, we would look at it like this body, which would be the environment in which all the work is done. And then the one who is doing all the work, that will be the Kshetrajna, the one who knows everything about the environment is the Kshetrajna. We could put the Kshetra in 2-fold. One is the space, and that would be the body. Another Kshetra would normally view it from the outside, would be the environment in which we are, in which our bodies are. So all the space that is around us, the environment that is around us. What Krishna is telling Arjuna here is, don't go so outside to look for the kshetra, to look for the environment. The real environment or the real space, what is it? Idam shariram kaunteya kshetramitya vidhiyate. It is this body in which you are. That is the space or the environment in which you do all the work, in which all the action happens. For example, now here the body encompasses the physical body that we know and the mental space, the mental body as well. The physical would be all the five senses, the skin from the outside, or even the internal organs like the heart, the kidney, and all those, everything. That is all part of the physical body. And then the mental space that we have, in which each and every vichara, each and every thought is projected onto. In that space, everything is projected. Let's talk about the mental now. Now, that space in which the thought is projected, there is something for sure. It's not that we all just project nothing, or it's not an illusion that that is there. That space is truly there. There's something in that space whereby thoughts arise, emotions arise, intellect arises, everything. There's even that space in which memory stays, whereby we may have forgotten something, but when we try to remember it, it just emerges in front of us. That space in which all that happens, where the memory is stored and where the memory is gotten back, that is all kshetra. Etadyo vetti tam prahu, kshetragya iti tadvida. The one who knows this is the kshetragya. In simple terms, if I want to retrieve a memory from the space in the mind that I have, the one who wants to retrieve the memory is the one who knows about the memory, the one who knows about the space, the one who knows about the mental space that we all have. So if I want to retrieve a memory from that mental space, I know about the memory. I know about the space. So the knower of the mental space is the kshetragya. The knower of the thought is the kshetragya. The knower of the emotion is the kshetragya. As we are doing Indian philosophy a bit, we should also get familiar with these terms a bit. Kshetra, meaning the body or the mind. And then kshetragya, meaning the knower of all. Kshetragyam chapi mam vidhi sarva kshetreshu bharata. Kshetra kshetragya yorgyanam yadgyan yattajnanam matam mama. You should also know me as the kshetragya. And as I am the kshetragya, if you know me as the kshetragya, then not only in one body, but sarva kshetreshu, in all that you see, I am the kshetragya. I am the knower of all. And that knowledge about the kshetra, that knowledge about the space, and the knowledge about the knower, That is what I count as knowledge. That is what I say knowledge is. One practical thing that normally is brought into practice is know each and every thought that comes in your mind. When a thought comes in your mind, be aware of it and do not get entangled with it. Because when you get entangled with thought, you are not the knower. When you're not the knower, then you're not the kshetragya. You become part of the kshetra, which you are not really. As Sankhya Shastra says it, that what happens is we look at a mirror, and then because we're always looking at the mirror, we never look at ourselves. We feel that that which is in the mirror is ourself, because there's a reflection of the self in the mirror. That reflection is not really you. It shows you who you are, like from the outside, but that reflection is not really you. What is really you is that which can stay without the mirror and that which can stay without the reflection of the mirror. So the kshetra, which is prakriti in Sankhya Shastra, or Maya, or nature would say in English, is like the mirror in front of us. It's always there. And the kshetragya is away from the mirror. The knower is away from the mirror. Since we're always looking into the mirror, there is a tadatmya that we bring with it. There is a connection that we bring with it. And then we feel that that person who is reflected in the mirror is I, is me. And that is the source of the ego. Krishna is saying, don't let that be. Krishna is saying, let the kshetragya, let the knower be different from the space in which knowing happens. There is a normal practice that is brought in this, that whenever there is a thought that happens within your mind, there is an emotion that happens within your mind, or you're in a certain mood, then know yourself that I am a person who has had this thought. Yes. But then if I have another thought as well, if this thought is brought down or is taken down, I will still remain as separate from that thought. When an emotion comes about, know that emotion and try to get behind that emotion. Try to know who is the knower of that emotion. Well, at first we'll do it with our intellect. We'll do it with our mind. But slowly, as you continue doing that practice, you'll get to know who the real knower is. Because right now, there's nothing separate within us. Like when we talk about what do we feel as we have inside, we have emotions inside, we have thoughts inside, we have the intellect inside. Well, there's a space in which everything is projected, that we know. But then we do not know the knower. Well, we may say that, oh, Gita says the Atman is there or the Brahman is there. That way we know him. But we do not know the knower experientially. We just know, like somebody has said it, or it's written in a scripture. But until you get it experientially, until you practice it, you never know it. The way to practice it slowly by slowly is to get into this notion. Whenever there's a thought that happens, get back, like pull your mind back, because right now that's all we have. Pull your mind back and contemplate. who is knowing this thought? And who is behind this thought? Whenever you have an emotion, we'll normally get into it. Like when we're happy, we are happy. We do not feel that happiness is occurring in our mind. So first thing to note is happiness is occurring in a mental space. And then go back. Who is realizing that happiness is occurring? When we're in a certain mood, then know that this mood is happening. Frustration is happening, or boredom is happening. Get to know where it is happening, and then try to differentiate who is knowing that boredom is happening. If you can even try it now a bit, like whatever we're thinking about, or even while you're listening, there is that aspect that is listening. There are the words that are coming into your mind. There is someone inside. There is something that is knowing all these words. There is something inside that is contemplating or thinking about these words. Somebody is trying to get the connections. So know the connections are happening, or know that listening is happening, and then get back a step. Who is it who is doing the listening? Who is it who is doing the contemplation? Who is it who is trying to connect this listening with what was previously known to the mind? Get all that in front of you, and then try to go back. What you do there is sort of try to create a vacuum in which you know that what the truth is. Because whenever the mental space is crowded, there's no vacuum. Everything is just all crowded. There's no space in there. What you need to do is know that all that is happening, the thoughts, the emotions, the mood, everything, the intellect, all that is happening in a certain mental space. And then try to create a vacuum by pulling back. And when you constantly create that vacuum, you slowly know that there is something different from what the thought is, from what the emotion is, from what the mood is. And there's also something different from the whole mental space in general, as a collection. And when you get to know that different Kshetragya, what Krishna calls, or that different Atman, or whatever name you would like to give, but the first thing is to realize that that different perspective in there is there, and that he who is looking at the thoughts is different and is not into the thoughts, is not one with the thoughts. And that person is not, well, I'm talking about the Atman. The Atman is not constantly evolving in the thoughts. If there is no thought in your mind, then the Atman is still there. The Kshetragya is still there. If there is no emotion in your mind, the Kshetragya will still be there. Well, right now we have not known any time whereby there is no Kshetragya. There is no emotion with us, or there is no thought within our mental space. But when you slowly do this, when you get back, then you realize that there is that space in between. What is happening right now is the wheel, like any car wheel that we'll talk about, is running so fast that you're not able to get to know the space in between. If that wheel moves a bit slowly, then you'll get to know that there is a spoke in the wheel, and then there's also the space in between that happens. And that space, once you know it, then you're also able to get back and know that I am not the thought. Because when a thought is not happening, when there's a space between two thoughts, I am still there. The kshetragya is still there. And that is important, to get yourself out of the mental crowd. Get yourself out of the mental disturbances, and then realize that there's something different in here. The way we know emotions that they happen, the way we know thoughts that they happen, we should also know that the kshetragya, the Atman, is also something that happens in here. It's not something just to talk about, but it's something that can be practiced and gotten to. There's something that is in here that looks at all the emotions and still doesn't get involved in the emotions so much. Is the background noise so prominent? Sorry.
We can hear you just fine. You're fine.
Okay, fine. So once you have done that, once you have known what the kshetragya is, once you have known what the true I is really there. Now, one thing to point out here, when I say I here now, it is the kshetragya. It is that which who knows. The normal I that we would use in English would be the ego, or the self, if we would call that self, who is always identifying himself with the work that is done, the action that we do, or the self that is always recognizing itself with the mental space or the emotions that the self has. When I say I here, it's not that self. When I say I here, it's not that ego. When I say I here, it is that which is different from that mental space, the emotions, the thoughts, and the actions that we normally say, I have done, or the actions that we normally relate to so much. We normally say that I am a teacher. That's fine. But sometimes what happens is, even after retirement, we cannot get over the thought that I have stopped teaching, that I'm not a teacher anymore. And that happens for so many people. Like after they get retirement, or after they leave a job, or if they're not allowed to do a certain particular type of work, they feel their identity has been removed from them. That is identifying yourself with the work that you do and not being able to differentiate yourself from the work. Krishna is saying that is not the kshetragya, that is not the no. The no is always different from the kshetra. The no is always different from the space in which the work is done. The no is always different from the mental space as well. Kshetragyam chapi mam vitti. Once you have known this, yes, the no is different. Then go deeper in that space. What you'll realize is Kshetragyam chapi mam vitti, sarva kshetreshu bharata. When you realize the individual self, and here individual self doesn't mean individuality by action or emotion or intellect, but individuality by differentiating yourself from all the actions and the mental space. That individuality that you get, what you certainly realize after having that individuality, you are this small drop of water. That's what you realize. And then that drop of water can become one with the ocean. And when it becomes one with the ocean, you realize that Kshetragyam chapi mam vidhi. You realize where Krishna is saying this from. Not only the individuated self that is different from the mental space, but then a step ahead, whereby Krishna is saying, when that drop of water gets one with the whole ocean and realizes that even a bubble that seems that is not part of the ocean, or a wave that seems that is not part of the ocean, is essentially part of the ocean. Every manifestation in the world, let's call it a wave. And the ocean, which is unmanifest, we normally don't see the ocean. We just see the waves that come up in the ocean. What Krishna is saying, that realize that the wave itself is part of the ocean. When the wave was not there, the ocean was there. When all the waves have their existence in place, even during their existence, they are part of the ocean. They're not different from the ocean. And when the wave again goes back into the ocean, it is still part of the ocean and not different from the ocean. So in three of those states, the wave is not different from the ocean. In the same way, all manifestation is in front of us. That is the second stage of the wave, whereby the wave is there. Even though the wave is being seen as different from the ocean, like it has come up, and it has certainly a different reality from the ocean, like you can see it, while the vast ocean, well, we normally look at the ocean and say, I have looked at the ocean. But look at it certainly, whereby you're not looking at the ocean, but all you see are the waves. There's no ocean you see. Further there, when you're able to look at the ocean, when you're able to look at the unmanifest, then you realize that even the manifest that is coming, even the wave that is coming above is part of the ocean. And there's no wave that is void of the ocean. There's no wave that can say that I am separated from the ocean now. Even though the wave looks as separate, it is essentially part of the ocean and can never be separated from the ocean. In that same way, Krishna is saying, Kshetragyam chapi mam vidhi. Also know me as the Kshetragya. Go deeper than the individual itself. And you'll realize that in everything and in everyone, living being, non-living being, however manifest that could be, inside there is the unmanifest that is always present, that is always the place on which the manifest stands on. And if the unmanifest was not there, the manifest would not be there. Just think about waves without an ocean. Impossible. So in the same way, we cannot look at the ocean directly, but we look at it through the waves. Still the ocean is there, and without the ocean, the waves would not be there. So in the same way, we only know the manifest, like we can only look at the manifest right now with our eyes, physically. But certainly, the manifest could not be there without the unmanifest. It's impossible. It's just like trying to think about waves without an ocean. Impossible. You can't even think about it. Like, what will the waves be made out of? Kshetra kshetragya yor jnanam, yatta jnanam matam mama. This type of knowledge is what I regard as knowledge, is what I regard as true knowledge. If the kshetra and the kshetragya is not separated and is always known as one. You know, there are quite different levels of looking at this, whereby there is one level of looking at the kshetra and kshetragya together at the level of what we are right now. And at the level, on the level that we are right now, we are looking at the kshetragya and kshetra as one. There's no difference between that. That is the wrong way of looking at it. Krishna is saying in the first verse. And then there is the separation that we need to do between them. The kshetra is different and the kshetragya is different. And in the third point here, Krishna is saying that certainly realize that everything is one again. It's not the same oneness that we are feeling right now. It's not the same oneness like I am one with the thought, but it is a subtler oneness. It's something that is different from the oneness that we know right now. Like we are not able to separate ourselves from the thoughts. And that oneness is different. It is something like knowing independence first. Like when you're dependent, you do not know independence. That we know. But then when you become independent and you realize that interdependence exists, and that interdependence is not the same as the dependence that is there before you become independent. That interdependence qualitatively is different from the dependence that you've left behind. So right now, what is happening to us is we are so dependent on the kshetra. That's why we cannot separate ourselves from the kshetra, because we are the kshetragya, essentially. When we separate ourselves and become independent of the kshetra, we shall realize that independence exists, yes, but there's a step ahead. Interdependence exists, where everything is joined together. It's not that now I have to lean upon something to have my existence in place, like happens in dependence. You can have your existence separate, but then you also realize that everything is joined and interwoven in a circular way. So oneness that we know right now is different from the oneness that Krishna is talking about. Totally different. Whereby Krishna is saying, I am the kshetragya within all the kshetras. Tat kshetram yatcha yadrikcha yadvikari yatascha yat sachayo yat prabhavascha tat samase name shrinu. Now Krishna here is going to talk about the kshetra. What the kshetra is. Tat kshetram yatcha, meaning that kshetra, what it is. Yadrikcha, what it looks like. You know, one thing is about what it essentially is. Meaning you have to experientially know what it is when you say yatcha. When you say yadrikcha, what yadrik means, what it looks like. You may not know it experientially, but then through words, what does it mean? And then yat vikari. What comes out of the kshetra? For example, we have the body and we have the mind. Then we should know that the mind has its vikara. Vikara meaning what it can produce. So the mind is there. It can produce thoughts. It can produce emotions. It can produce mental states, all that. So we should know that. That is vikari, meaning what it will produce. Yatascha yat. Yata meaning from which it evolves. So the kshetra is there, but where does the kshetra evolve from? What is the origination of the kshetra? That Krishna is going to talk about. Sachayo yat prabhavascha. Now, Krishna has talked about the kshetra, and now he's going to the kshetragya. Sachayo yat prabhavascha. Who is he? Who is the knower? And yat prabhavascha. What strengths does he have? What is his greatness? What is the greatness of the knower? And how can he be different from the known? That's samasena mesrino. Know this, and I will talk about it in short. Samasa meaning having a short form of it. Rishibhir bahudha gitam chandobhir vividhai prathak brahma sutra padeschaiva hetumadbhir vinischitaihi. Where has all this been said? How should we know about it? What should we refer to? Normally, a reference point should be something that I know about, like the one who is talking about it knows about, and the one who is listening also knows about. That is a reference point. Now, from there, both of us can have a journey towards knowing what the speaker wants the listener to know. Krishna is giving the reference points here. Rishibhir bahudha gita. It has been talked about by so many sages, those who have known the kshetra and the kshetragya as different, and the oneness that lies certainly behind it, everything. Chando bir vividhai prathak. Even in the Vedas, it has been talked about. Brahma Sutra Padaischaiva. Brahma Sutra is like the topmost of the Vedanta Darshana. If you know the Brahma Sutra, and if you know what the Brahma Sutra talks about, then you know the essence of all the knowledge. It is like the crown of Vedanta. Hetu madbhir vinischitaihi. Not only that, the scriptures talk about it, or those who know talk about it, but even logically, you can contemplate upon it. Logically, you can get separated from the kshetra and know yourself as different. Know that which is different from all the body, all the mind. Now, Krishna is going to first start with the kshetra, what the kshetra is, step by step. Mahabhutanya hankaro buddhiravyaktameva cha indriyani dashaikam cha panchachendriya gocharaha. What does the kshetra mean? And what is it made up of? Mahabhutani, ahankara. The first thing said is Mahabhutani. There are five, what do you call it? 5 things that make up the whole world. As Indian philosophy talks about it. It is earth, fire, air, water, and space. Normally, akasha, which is space, would normally be translated as ether. But as we normally know, is the reason why ether was brought about by scientists is because light cannot travel through space without a medium. That was the normal norm. But then it was known that light could travel through a vacuum as well. You don't need that concept of the ether. But space itself like the vacuum itself can allow it. So I would rather like to translate Akasha as space. Just know it as a vacuum, like somewhere where none of these four are. Somewhere where there's no light, there's no earth, there's no water, and there's no air. Such a space, just space itself. That makes up the whole kshetra. And we'll look at it like our body is also made up of those 5 elements, basic elements. What our body is also made up of is ahankara, which is the ego, buddhi, which is the intellect, avyaktamevacha. It's also made up of nature. It's also made up of swabhava, which you cannot really contemplate upon. Like you can know what the ego is. We can talk about it. You can know what the intellect is. Krishna puts swabhava as avyakta, meaning when you try to talk about it, you really you can't really talk about it. When you close your fist to grasp it, it just slides out of your fist. That's how it is. That's why it's called avyakta. It's not vyakta. Avyakta meaning it doesn't show itself fully. It's unmanifest in that way. Indriyani dashaikam cha pancha chendriya gochara. Another aspect of that is the 5 senses that we know. Apart from those 5 senses that we know, there is also the other. For example, why it's written Dasha Indriyani would talk about the hands, feet, and because normally we take taste to be a sense, but we normally do not take talking, because the action of talking happens from the mouth. But there are 2 actions that are happening from the mouth. One is taste, that we take into the senses. It's part of the 5 senses. But then karma indriya, those that allow action to happen, meaning the hands, the feet, the mouth, in the way of talking. So that consists of the 5 senses and then the 5 indriyas, or the 5 doors through which action happens. Ekam, here the one that is being talked about is the mind. And that mind is different. It is totally different from the intellect. It is also different from the ego. Panchacha indriya gocharaha. That which is in front of the 5 senses. Meaning, if we talk about taste as a sense, then we also need to talk about the food that the sense will get, what it will sense. When you talk about ears that hear, you also need to talk about the words that will be heard. Krishna is going on and saying, this is also part of the kshetra. What is it? Ichha dvesha sukham dukkham sanghatas chetana dhritihi etak kshetram samasena savikara mudaritam. Not only this makes up the kshetra, yes. But then Krishna is going on. Ichha, meaning desire. Any desire that comes up within you is also kshetra. Dvesha, meaning hatred. Sukham, meaning pleasure or happiness. And dukkham, meaning pain or sorrow. Sanghatas chetana dhritihi. The aggregate of all this is also kshetra. Krishna is saying that yes, while you're doing each and every activity, what you can do as a practice, know that you're testing something, like when you're eating, know that you're testing something, know that food is there, know that food is part of the kshetra, the sense is part of the kshetra. It is part of the known, not the knower. And then the mind which is contemplating upon what type of food or what type of test the mind is getting is also part of the known. And then the happiness that is gotten from eating is also part of the known. The desire after having the happiness, the desire to get more of that food is also part of the known. It is not yet part of the knower. Practically, in practice, how to do this is when you're eating, this is just an example, but we have to take an example. When you're eating, know the food, know the sense that is testing the food, know the mind which is contemplating on what type of test it has gotten. Also know the happiness that comes up in the mind, and also know the desire of more food, and know that that is still different from you. You meaning he who knows that this is happening, he who can stay different from all that and can just look at all this happening within the body. Do not stop it at any point. Do not try to say no to any test that is coming in. But what you need to do is just know it is happening. When you get angry, know the person whom you're getting angry with. Know the cause of the anger, which is probably some physical, material thing that you have not gotten. Also know the anger that is happening within your mental space, within your mind. And then know that you're still behind all that. You can look at all that without being affected. Because normally when we are in such a state of anger, we become one with that state. There's no difference between us and the anger. So there's that space you need to make between the anger and yourself. When you make that space in between, that vacuum, then you'll really know that the know is different and the known is different. Then you'll not need to stop the anger from coming. The anger will just arise and it will just drop automatically, because it will not have a space in which it will be able to stay. There's a vacuum in between now. Krishna has talked about the kshetra, and then he will now go on to talk about the kshetragya. He'll go on to talk about who the knower is. He'll go on to talk about how to get to know who the knower is, what you need to do. So any questions about the kshetra and any thoughts that you may have?
So everyone, if you have any questions or comments, you can type exclamation point in the chat or raise your hand in Zoom. And I'm going to unmute everybody, so just give me 1 second. All right, first up we have Joe.
Thank you, Yogeshwar, because that is a very difficult passage to explain. So let me try and repeat it back a little bit as far as my understanding, and maybe you can correct some of the things that I'm thinking about, because it's very, very challenging. So the self is distinct from nature, and the self is separate from the body, right? And this is really, and that's where the example of, when you gave the example of eating as, the idea that knowing the objects, knowing the feelings, knowing desires, and knowing that we're separate from all of that is important for our own personal transcendence. So it's an idea of being, it's almost consciousness. It's a way of being self-aware and understanding ourselves. So this is really very deep. And so it's also understanding that there's a relationship between us and God as well. And so that they're integrated. And that's understanding that is critical for transcendence. Because that's actually, we're talking about what's the actual nature of the Gita. So is that somewhat capturing what you're trying to communicate? Because I think about this all the time in the Platonic and Aristotelian way, and how they have different perspectives of what nature is. And in order to understand that nature, in order to understand transcendence, you have to understand what nature it's rooted in. So this is understanding the nature of the Gita in a sense that how we're integrated with ourselves and God. Is that somewhat capturing? And the food example was very good, the eating example. So thank you for that. I mean, that does make it very real for me. Anyway, does it somewhat capture?
Yes, it does capture. And what is normally talked about this, and I'm reading so many commentaries about this part of Gita, when you read any commentary about this part of Gita, then you know what the commenter thinks about. Like, this is the most difficult part of the Gita. If you can comment on this part of the Gita, if you have a new commentator, just look at this part of Gita and you'll know what his understanding is about the whole of Gita. So this is a summary about everything in the Gita. For example, Ramanujacharya will write like 10 pages just on this. Even Shankaracharya has lots about this. Just on one verse, that is just between verse 1, 2, and 3. Like any one of those 3 verses is versely written about by any commentator. So when you get to any new commentary of Gita, if you want to know what the commentator thinks about, just flip to chapter 13, read verse 1, 2, and 3. Then you'll know what the commentator is thinking about the whole of Gita. When you get to this part, it is like the most controversial part, how to comment on this part. Because this is where you'll know that Ramanujacharya will be different from Shankaracharya. And this is where the main difference arises. Whereby, if you want to know what the commentator thinks about and how he differs from other commentators, this is the place to look for. So in that way, it's difficult, yes. In another way, it's also difficult because this practice itself is not usual. It's not what we normally do in our daily lives. But if we do it, it's like the heart of getting to know what reality is. Because if you want to know something, you first have to be separated from it. You can't know something when you're so indulged in it. Like when anger comes and you're so involved in anger, you'll never know what it is. You'll never know why it arises and why it fades away, or why you have anger on a particular person while he didn't do so wrong onto you. While somebody else did so wrong onto you, still you can't get angry on them. Maybe because they have power or they have money with them. Yeah. So if you want to know the essentiality or the qualities of anger, you have to separate yourself from it and say, I am not anger, and I can know what anger is. I can know that whole emotion itself. So when that happens in practice, then when you know anger, or when you know any object or emotion per se, when you know it fully, the desire or the attraction to it automatically drops. So this part is also difficult in that way. Practically, it's difficult.
But it's the basis of transcendence. It's like in order to do it. Like, so this idea of now this has given me a deeper understanding of transcendentalism as well. But it's interesting to hear that there's differing viewpoints on nature, the nature of the metaphysics of it. As you know, you said there's different commentaries, like as far as what they actually think. But thank you. This has been very enlightening to me. Thank you.
All right, if anybody else has any questions or comments, you can type exclamation points in chat or raise your hand to Zoom. While we're waiting for that, yeah, guess what? I just wanted to let you know, the thing that stuck out for me is the part about the ocean being the unmanifest and the waves being the manifest. And please let me know if I got that right. But the wave being a part of the ocean, it can never separate. And that's what we see sometimes. Sometimes we can't see the ocean, but we can see part of the ocean through the waves. And so what I got from that is like looking at the unmanifest through a manifested thing, like through a creation. Like we always say in nature, you know, when you go in nature, you can see, if you believe in God, God's creation, you know, through a tree, through nature. Like I love the mountains, I love the ocean, right? I can see God in that. I can see God's creation in that. Now I'm not seeing God himself, but through his creation, I'm kind of seeing him. So I got that part, but this has been amazing so far.
Yeah, you could think about it like that. And normally that would be like the normal thought of it, the creation and the created, like that. But then the notion here, I'd just like to point out this. The notion here is like the creator and the created are not different essentially. Like look at it in that way, whereby the wave and the ocean, there's nothing like the ocean is separate and the wave is separate, some distant place. What Gita says is the wave and the ocean are basically in the same place. They're not in different dimensions. They're just there where they're supposed to be. And the creator can never be differentiated from the creation. If you look at the ocean and the waves, if you look at the ocean and the waves, the ocean just wants to manifest itself. It just wants to show itself. And how does it show itself? Through the waves. It's not like now the waves will be in a different dimension and the ocean will be in a different dimension. Same place, same everything. But what we will see is only the wave, not the ocean. And that is how it is viewed. Like, for example, let's also take another example. A person is dancing, yes? And normally, if you look at this, the whole of creation in Indian philosophy, in different Indian philosophies, the whole of creation is looked at as Leela. It is an act of God. And how act is taken in is just by an example. Look at it by this example of a dancer who is dancing. When the dancer is dancing, that dance cannot be separated from the dancer. The dance is part of the dancer. But the dancer is essentially separate, like he can stop dancing. It's his will. But when you look at the dance itself, the dance cannot be shown differently from the dancer. So the creation itself is like the dance, and the creator is like the dancer. Not essentially different, but it's just a way how the dancer shows his emotions. And when you look at the dance, you know certainly what the dancer is feeling at this time, how he wants to show his emotions, and all his thoughts are shown through the dance. That's a way of knowing the dancer.
Thank you, Yogeshwar. That was amazing. And that example of the dancer really helped me get that. So thank you. Up next, we have Joe.
Actually, we can come back to me. My question is, it's probably going to be answered a little later, so I'll hold off. Thank you. Brian, I think, is next.
Yep. Brian? Or Penny or Penny?
Penny has something, yeah.
Yeah, I had a question, and maybe we had some internet problems, so it came in a little late, but I know Yogeshwar was talking about kind of like practicing like the separation, like trying to, to see the Atman. And I think the example you gave about eating was something like that. Like if you're eating and you try to separate everything away that we usually think of, then we would be what would be left. Is there any other example, or maybe they go into this later in the Gita about how one can go about trying to do that?
So there are different practices. Some go on to this practice of physical practice, whereby they just go out in nature, listen to sounds. Now, when you're listening to the sound, there's only one thing that is coming to all your five senses. Like all your five senses will get into one, whereby you'll only be listening. You'll not be doing anything else. When you're listening only, it's like putting all the five senses into one stream now, only listening, not doing anything else. So when you're listening, you listen. Where is the sound coming from? Where is it produced? And then you go on to what the sound is itself, essentially. How the sound is being captured into your ears. You like meditate upon your ears. When it comes to your ears now, you're listening to the sound, yes. Then you go on to your mind. What emotions does my mind have? What is coming up? What are the thoughts that are coming in my mind? What is the mental space like? Then you're able to know that all this is happening. Like it's coming up and it's going down. It's arising and it's demolishing. All that is happening. But still, I am out of all that. You certainly realize this, that because that which is the Atman is always in the same state. The Atman doesn't change states. It doesn't change moods. It's always as it is. So you can do it with listening like that, or you can do it with food, like as I did, or what they do, like in the yoga tradition, what they do is they contemplate their eyes onto one thing. They stop thinking about anything. They just focus their eyes on one thing. They take that one object inside their mind now. They close their eyes. After that, they're thinking about that one object. That one object is there. There's no any other thing in their mental space now. And they can see that I am the knower and that object is the known. So what in yoga tradition, what happens is you decrease what comes into the mental space. That's what yoga is about. That's what concentration is about, basically. Decreasing what comes into the mental space, only having one object in the mental space. What that helps with is it slows down the mental space. It's like a wheel of a car. When the wheel slows down, you're able to see the space in between. And you're able to see that that space in between is different from the spokes. But when the wheel is spinning so fast, you're not able to differentiate the space in between from the spokes that are in there. They will all be like one thing that is spinning all over. So that slowing down is important. Like if you want to do it by that way of slowing down first, you'll have to go by the way of what yoga says. So you concentration on one thing, and then when your mind is slowed down, you'll be able to separate yourself from that which is known. And that which remains after that is the kshetrajna, is the knower.
Thank you, Yogeshwar, and thank you, Brian. Thank you, Penny. Up next, we have Karithan. Did I say that right?
Yeah, it's Kirtan.
You can go ahead.
Hi.
Okay, so yeah, I have a question. Hi, my name is Udaya. So as you explained about like waves and ocean, I was trying to like correlate it to the humankind. Like if we consider every human being as a wave, then what is the ocean?
Yes, so the ocean is the unmanifest. It is what we call, whatever name you'll give it, Brahman or unmanifest or the center, all that is the ocean. And everything rests on the ocean. There's nothing without the ocean. There's nothing void of the ocean.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Sorry, like just a following question. So if we have to explain it to someone who doesn't believe in God, or like if we have to explain it in scientific terms, so how do we explain that?
In a way, normally how we think about Brahman or how we think about God is through the relation of creation and creator. That's the real relation that we normally put. What the Gita does is remove that relation first, like keep that relation aside. What you see here, like whatever is part of the Brahman. Whatever you see, it's like just the example I gave, the dance and the dancer. It's like, you see, you're only looking at the emotions, only looking at the feelings, you're only looking at the dance steps. When you start looking at the dancer himself, that is when you get to know what Brahman is. It's like an underlying truth. Like maybe if you even put it as form and function, you'll never see the function. What you see is the form. And in that way, when you're only looking at the forms, you may forget the function. Yes, fine, because that's physically what comes upon you is the form only. What Krishna is talking about here is go ahead, like go beyond just looking at the forms and look at the function that underlies everything. Look at the unmanifest that underlies everything, and you'll know what Brahman is. It's not about logically proving that Brahman exists. It's about experientially knowing that there is something beyond. Maybe if you don't want to do this, like don't give it a name. That's fine. Because if you give it a name, you'll have to prove it exists. Don't give it a name for now. What you do is experientially just go towards your boundaries. Go beyond your boundaries. Whatever experience you have there about the unmanifest, if you want to give it a name, then then give it a name, because that experience exists beyond.
Thank you. So, Brian, do you have a
Yeah, I
question
have
or
a
a comment?
Yeah. The so again, I apologize again, we came in a little late, but on what I heard, I do have a question. You know, it's hard to paraphrase or capture in different words what you have said, but as the way I would put it is that these passages from the Gita are describing both the sensory perception, the capability of sensing things. So, if you will, the mouth and the tongue is a thing in the world, just like the thing that it tastes, that the tongue tastes, is a thing in the world. So, and when these things come into contact, they're kind of wedded to each other. And then also the thought you have and the mind where you have it, those are things in the world. And the feelings you have about it and the desire, those are kind of, if you will, things in the world. You know, they come and go. They're kind of wedded to each other, but the tongue, the sense, the mind, the capacity for desire, capacity for thought and feeling, those kind of go dormant or quiet, or can go dormant or quiet, but they still exist as things in the world. And what I think, I don't know. Now here's that, if that's a characterization that's correct, I'd like to know that, but then also then the knower that you're talking about, who knows the mind or can observe the mind and remain still or quiet, is that also a thing in the world?
Yes. So normally what we'd call a thing in the world is something that continuously changes, because that's what nature is about. Something that continuously changes. It changes its form, it changes its qualities, it changes in each and every way. When you get to the knower now, you'll realize that this is something that you've never experienced. That's one thing. So it's not part of the normal nature that you know. It is something that always exists, has always existed, but you've not just concentrated upon it, or you've not paid attention to it. So that's one aspect. Brahman exists everywhere in the world. It's just that we don't attend to it. We don't pay attention to it. Another point is what you call the world. Normally, what we call the world is something outside us. That's not the only definition of the world. The definition of the world is everything that constantly changes, whether it's something outside you or it's inside you. If it's a thought that constantly changes, like there's no thought that totally remains there. If it's that and it constantly changes, it's part of Prakriti in Gita terms. So Prakriti is something that is what you'll call the world, we'll call Prakriti. Now, the definitions are essentially different. What you call the world is something outside your body, while what Gita calls Prakriti is everything outside your body, yes. Also everything that is inside your body as well. Whatever, even your mind, your mental space, or your internal organs is also, everything is part of Prakriti. In that way, Prakriti is everything that changes constantly. If something doesn't change, which is the knower, it it is something different from Prakriti. If something never gets into different steps, into different modes, that is the knower, who is different, who is totally different from that which changes constantly. And that is what we'll call Kshatragya in Gita.
Thank you.
If anybody else has any questions or comments, you can type exclamation point in chat or raise your hand in Zoom. If not, Yogeshwar, do you want to move on to the next verse?
Sure. If there are no questions, we can move ahead.
Okay. David, can you read verse 7 to 11?
He already read 7, so 8 through 12 is the next part of the translation. It's all grouped together.
Okay.
There's one thing to note, yeah. There are different versions of the Gita whereby the version I am looking at doesn't have Arjun's question as the first verse. So the numbering will be slightly off by 1 in that respect. So the version that David has the question of Arjuna. So it will go 1 down.
Okay, so Yogeshwar, so where do you want him to read? Is it okay that he reads 8 to 12 or?
Yeah, it's 8 to 12 in his version.
Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's all together in this one. So it's humility, pridelessness, nonviolence, tolerance, honesty, rendering service to a bona fide spiritual master, cleanliness, steadfastness, self-control, renouncing the desires of the senses, free from false egoism and aware of this distressful inauspiciousness of birth, old age, disease, and death, being without attachment to son, wife, and home, equipoised in all situations, consistent, devoid of elation or disappointment regarding favorable or unfavorable circumstances, preference for solitary places, aversion of mundane society, and exclusively performing devotional service unto me by the unalloyed science of uniting the individual consciousness with the ultimate consciousness, always aspiring for self-realization, constantly meditating on the ultimate truth as the goal of true wisdom. All this is thus proclaimed as knowledge, and whatever is contrary to this is nescience.
Thank you, David. Yogeshwar, you're up.
Amanitvam adambhitvam ahimsa kshantirarjavam acharyopasanam shaucham sthairyam vinigraha. Krishna is now talking about ways to get towards the knower. This is called jnana. This is called the path onto which you'll get to know the knower. There is the known that we have talked about. That is the kshetra. There is the knower that we have also talked about. That is the kshetragya. Now the link in between is the knowledge itself. When this knowledge comes in between the knower and the known, is when the knower and the known can be separated. When you do not have this knowledge or this link in between, you can't separate them. That's why Krishna is saying that this jnanam is something that you'll be able to separate the knower and the known. Well, normally would say that if it's a link between the knower and the known, how does it separate them? What I would like to talk about is just look at it like a boundary. A boundary separates one country to another, or whatever, like one district from another. That boundary is there, yes. What that boundary does is two things. It separates both of them and it connects both of them as well. It's a link between both of them, and it's also a separator. It's like a division there. Don't only look at a boundary as a separator, but also look at a boundary as a link between both countries. Like that's where they can maybe transfer their goods from, or that's where maybe they can, like, you know, interact with each other. That's a place. In the same way, when you take it inside, the knower, the known, and the knowledge, until you know the link between the knower and the known, you can never really separate them. You can never have the boundary between them. So the link itself is the separator. Amanitvam adambhitvam ahimsa kshantirarjavam acharyopasanam shaucham sthairyamaatma vinigraha. Amanitvam, meaning humility. In terms of amanitvam, what we need to know is when you're filled with mana, meaning ego, when you're filled with yourself only, what will happen is you'll identify yourself so much with the kshetra, you'll identify yourself so much with the known that you'll not be able to know the knower. You'll not be able to separate yourself. It's the same with all these qualities. If you do the opposite, as Krishna says in the last verse within this cluster, the last verse says that this is all jnana. What is different from this jnana, like what is the opposite of this jnana, is ajnana. It is ignorance. And when you have that ignorance within you, is when the knower and the known will be known as one. That is the state in which we are. What we need to do is differentiate both of them. What will help us to separate both of them are these qualities. The first is amanitvam. Why it is put as the first? It's because it's the most important. Before you create a valley within yourself, there is nothing that can be contained within you. Like if you're always a hill, however much rain showers onto you, you'll never be able to contain it. So amanitvam is the first quality. If you're able to make a valley within yourself, like you remove all the ego from yourself and put it aside, then all the other qualities will automatically shower upon you. All the other qualities will automatically come. Adambhitvam, meaning you should not be pretending what you are not. You should not be putting on masks of honesty when you're not honest. You should not be putting upon masks of truth when you're not truthful. This is the second, like, most important quality. Why? Because what will happen is, because you want to show the world that you have these qualities, you'll put upon the mask of the other qualities that are going to be said, maybe ahimsa, kshanti, arjavam, acharyopasanam, all those, or vairagya as well. You'll put on a mask of those qualities upon you. Now that mask is really dangerous. It's the most dangerous thing you can do, because you don't really have the quality. You're putting up a mask of the quality within yourself, because your view of yourself is through the world. How the world views you is what you feel that I am. When the world says yes, or I feel you're truthful, you feel that yes, I'm truthful. You're looking at yourself through the mask now. That is the most dangerous thing, because it will stop you from getting truthful now. If you feel you're already truthful, there's nothing to go towards. There's no truth to get now. Or if you feel that you're already having vairagya, then you don't need to go towards vairagya now. You already have it. While that is the most dangerous of all. Ahimsa, Kshanti, Rajavam. Now, this is the list of all the qualities that are supposed to be gotten so that you can differentiate yourself, who is the knower, from the known. Ahimsa, meaning no injury to the other. We'll normally take no injury to the other by the terms of not killing another person. That's fine. Or not killing any other living being. That's also fine. But not hurting them physically in any way. Not just not killing them, but not even beating them. And then you also take a step further. You go more subtle, whereby you don't also tell them harsh words, because sometimes that is more injurious than beating them up physically. And then you also go deeper into that. You do not also hurt them in any way. We've talked about physically, and we've also talked about using words, but you also don't hurt them anywhere, emotionally, or anywhere in their mental states. What you should do is allow them mentally and physically to get towards Brahman, to allow them to realize what the truth is. That is ahimsa. Shanti, as we had talked about yesterday in the qualities of bhakta, shami, not only forgiveness when somebody has done wrong to you, because when you forgive, that means that you're felt bad about it, like you felt that I've been done wrong on. What should happen is you should not also have that feeling of being done wrong upon. You should only just be in that state of forgiveness. And when you're in that state of forgiveness, there's nothing wrong that happens to you. You're automatically forgiving. Arjavam, meaning uprightness, like you do what you say. Riju, in Arjavam comes from the root Riju, and the word Riju means the way you are inside is the way you are outside. There is no difference between that. Whatever you say with your mouth or in your speech is the same as what your emotions reflect, is the same as what your thought reflects, is the same as what you'll act out. Your speech is not different from your action, and your speech should also not be different from your emotions. Now, your actions should also not be different from your emotions. If you feel like something bad has happened to you right now, yes, cry as well. Like, don't wait. Like, so many people around me, so I should not cry at this time. Or, you know, at that time, what you're doing is putting up masks. So many masks that at some point, you may not even know who you truly are. Because you may also feel that I have to be that strong person who everybody feels I am. But just letting it out, like letting that cry out, even though so many people around you, shows how riju you are, how upfront you are about your emotions, or how upfront you are about your speech, and how upfront you are about your actions. All those three should be the same. Not that when you say something, your actions behind the curtains will be different. Everything should be the same. Acharya Upasanam. One thing that really helps to know the truth, to know reality, is Acharya Upasanam. Service of a teacher who has already known the truth. We normally take this as a simple thing, like, oh, we do service because maybe the teacher needs the service. But this is not the case. Here you're doing service because you want something back. You want that quality of knowing reality back. You're doing that service because you need to stay near the teacher. And that nearness of the teacher has so much within itself. For example, it shows you the qualities the teacher has. The teacher has all these qualities of Arjavam. He says what he does, or he has these emotions and he shows them out. And Stairyam, Atma Vinigraha, all those qualities, the steadiness and the self-control are within the teacher. How will you get them? Not just through words, but you have to stay with the teacher. When you stay with the teacher, you need something to stay with the teacher. And that something will be the service. The service is just a by the way. And the most important thing here is staying with the teacher. And actually translating this as service towards the teacher would be wrong, because upasana, upa asana. Asana means stay and upa means near. So in essence, this means staying near the teacher in any way you can, whether it's asking questions or whether it's service to the teacher, anywhere, just stay near the teacher. One thing is knowing all these qualities within the teacher will happen within yourself. Another thing is the teacher certainly transfers so many experiences to you, either through words or through actions or through anything that he interacts with you. However he interacts with you, he'll transfer his experiences to you. That's also a way of getting to know jnana, getting the knowledge of the separateness of the knower and the known. Shaucham, meaning purity. Purity is a great essence in philosophy. Now, normally you would feel, oh wow, philosophy should only be about thinking, contemplating. But purity of the body, purity of the mind as well, brings a clearness whereby whatever is being talked about, directly in your mind, you can know what it is. That's what purity means. There's no congestion in your mind. There is no crowdiness in your mind. Everything is just clear cut. If the acharya or the guru or the teacher talks about something, it's clear cut in your mind. Yes, this is what the teacher is talking about. And when you're pure, you can also have the utmost attention. You can give the utmost attention to any object. When you give utmost attention to any object, you realize that that's an object and that is known. And the knower, who is me, can be differentiated from that. Stadium. Stadium meaning steadiness. Being steady on any practice. You know, when you're not steady on any practice, one day you're doing this practice of being differentiated. Another day you're doing a practice of maybe contemplating upon what the outside world is, what it looks like. The third day, what you're going to do is maybe talk about what life should be, what happiness should be. When you're running around all that, all those are important points, yes. But when you're running around all that, you'll never know one in depth. the normal example that is given here, because in ancient India, they were like, you have to dig wells to get to water. You have to, so when you're digging a well, sort of, or a borehole, or whatever it will be translated to in modern terms, when you're digging that well, what would happen is if you only go 10 meters and then go dig another well, which is also going to be 10 meters, and then go dig the third well, you'll never get to the water, which is the essence of your action. You'll only get to 10 meters down, and then you'll feel like, oh, nothing is coming out. Let me dig another well at another place. That doesn't work. You have to be steady. You have to go down the well. You have to dig it more. Maybe the water will come at 30 meters. So instead of digging 3 wells of 10 meters each, dig 1 well of 30 meters and you'll reach the water. That is steadiness of practice. That is steadiness of going towards one thing. And what you'll certainly realize is when you get to one concept, like when you can grasp one concept steadily and you know what it means, then all the other concepts will have what they mean. Like you'll know what they mean automatically. You'll not need to contemplate upon them so much. Everything will just be automatic to you. Stairyam, we've talked about that. Atma vinigraha, self-control here. The normal notion of self-control that we may know is not allowing your senses to go to some place, or not allowing your body to be in some states. How I take self-control as is, what self-control here means, know what you are doing. That's the first thing. Whatever you're doing, whichever field you are in, first know what you are doing. Don't stop it. First know it. When you know it fully, you can control what you are doing, because the essence is not about not doing anything. Because when you want to control, it's not like control and keep it with you. It will collect rust after a long time. It's not about control and then doing nothing. It's about control in what you are doing. So don't stop what you are doing. Keep on doing what you are doing. But then slowly pay more attention. Have more concentration. Slowly by doing that, you'll realize that you have more control over it. When you can separate yourself intellectually, like using your buddhi, from the known, when the knower can be separated, automatically you'll have control over the known. You'll have control over your mind. You'll have control over your emotions. That is an automatic thing that happens. Indriyartheshu vairagyam anahankar evacha janma mrityu jara vyadhi dukkha dosha nudarshanam. Krishna here is now talking about vairagya. Indriyartheshu vairagya. Vairagya, if we'll talk about it, is viraga, meaning raga meaning attachment, V meaning no attachment. So vairagya meaning no attachments to sense objects. Normally how vairagya is translated is like you should not be interested in. It's not about not having interest in it, or not having compassion towards, or not having attention towards. What vairagya is, not having attachment towards. That is vairagya. You may be doing everything in the world, because like if you say vairagya is like not having interest in it, when you have vairagya towards eating, what will you do? You have to stay with your body. That's a must. How do you do vairagya with eating? It's not possible. What should happen is Vairagya should be translated as non-attachment. Don't be attached to it. When you're not attached to eating, it's like you're eating so that the body can stay. The body can stay in its utmost physical form. So what you'll do, what will feather out is eating because you have the desire to eat. Now all those desires will fade away. When you have something that you feel is really nice to eat or is really tasteful, you do not eat it more because you only have to sustain your body. That is non-attachment in this case. And you'll not stop eating, but what you'll constantly do is know that I am different from the food, I am different from the sense, I am different from the taste. I am different from the desire as well. When you get differentiated and separated from all that, that non-attachment automatically happens. You're not attached to it. Anahankara, no ego in you, the absence of ego. When the absence of ego happens, then a lot happens within your life. Like when there's no ego, just imagine, like ego is what everything else bases upon. Ego means the self that you have built up. When you say that I like this and I do not like this, what is it based upon? It is that self that you have built upon. When you say that I am a teacher and I cannot leave that profession, when you leave that profession, you feel that you're void of your identity. What is happening there is that you're identifying yourself with your ego so much. So when you remove ego from there, everything else, all the attachments to the world, just feather away. Janma mrityu jara vyadi dukkha dosha nudarshana. What you need to do here is Janma mrityu is constantly happening. Janma mrityu meaning birth and death. That is constantly happening, and it's going to happen over cycles. We can also view this as birth and death as day and night happens constantly. We go to sleep and become awake constantly. So that constantness of going to sleep and becoming awake again. And then jara, meaning getting old, like old age. When old age is happening, that normal intuition that we have that, oh, I'm getting old and all my body parts are now, they won't be able to work. Vyadi, meaning pain, any pain that you are having. What you need to do in that certainly is you need to separate from all that. You need to separate from the birth and death. You need to separate from the states of being awake and being asleep. You need to separate yourself from the pain. And you need to separate yourself from the old age. When you're saying, I am becoming old, what you need to say, I realize that this body is becoming old. When pain comes upon you, what you need to do is, I realize this body is in pain. So realize that the body is in pain and try to get the body out of pain. But even while trying to get the body out of pain, what you need to do is get the body out of pain and realize that when the body was in pain, the body was in pain, not me. When the body is out of pain, it is the body that has that quality and it is out of pain, not me. Me as the seer, me as the knower, is just knowing the pain that is coming upon the body and is being removed from the body. You have to know all that. You have to look at all that. if you do not look at all that, you'll never be able to separate yourself. It's not about going somewhere where you do not feel pain now. It's about staying in this world, looking at each and every quality that is in this world, each and every state in which you get into, each and every emotion that you get into, each and every thought that you have within this world, while interacting with it and looking at it and knowing it. When you look at it and when you know it is when you get beyond it. When you know any emotion, even anger or frustration fully, the causes of it, why it happens, and the cause of this particular anger that has come upon me. Maybe it's an outside object or an inside frustration. And how to deal with it at different stages. Now, knowledge is all that, from the cause to the effect that it brings. And when does it stay and when does it fade out? Knowing all that and looking at it as the knower brings a different type of knowledge when you're separated from it. Asaktirana bhishvanga putra dara grihadishu nityam cha samachittatvam nishta nishtopapattishu. Asakti, meaning you should not get so much attached with anything. Now, Krishna here is saying putra dara grihadishu. It's non-attachment, which is asakti, and anabhiswanga is not identifying yourself with. So two things, not being attached to and not being identified with. What? Your children, dara meaning your wife or your partner, and then grihadishu meaning your house and all the property you have. So griha doesn't mean just the house that you live in, but in general terms, all the property that you have. And if you take it more generally, then even the money you have and even whatever you have in the lockers or the bank or the property that you've invested in, everything, including your business, not being identified with it. As we have talked before, like when you leave your profession, if you're so much identified with it, what happens is when you leave it, you feel like a part of you has fallen off. A part of you has been ripped off and you can't live without it. That's what happens when you identify with it. When your bank goes like, well, for example, when all your money goes, when all your money goes away, what happens is you feel like, oh, something about me has been ripped off. And that should not happen, because while you're going towards something that is unmanifest, you should not be so much attached to something that is manifest. When you're attached to something that is manifest so much, your mind will always go to the manifest. It will never be able to contemplate on the unmanifest. It will never be able to pay attention to the unmanifest, which is everywhere. Because your attention is always being forwarded to the manifest, towards the money, towards your relations that you have. It's not about not having relations. It's not about even the notion of breaking all the relations that you have, but it's about being in the world and not being attached. This is the main concept, because you can see Krishna himself was in the world. He was a king himself, and he had subjects that he had to rule upon. And he also had a family life. Well, he had a family life that was even more complicated than any one of us has. He had thousands of wives. He had thousands of children. Like, just imagine that. Still, he says that staying in between that, what you need to do is be non-attached and do not identify yourself with. Nityam cha samachittattvam ishtanishtopapatishu. What you need to do is when something desirable comes upon you or something undesirable comes upon you from the world, because the world will throw everything upon you. Whatever you desire, you may not get. Whatever you desire, you may get it so abruptly that you get overwhelmed. Whatever those states are, ishta, anishta, upapattishu, whether you're attaining something that is desirable or something that is undesirable, what you should have is samachittatvam, even-mindedness. You should have this samatva upon everything. And that samatva or even-mindedness should not only be for one time, but it should be nityam. It should always be there. That even-mindedness helps a lot in the way that when you're even-minded, there's nothing that your attention goes towards apart from where you want to take it. The remote control of your mind, your attention, or your thoughts is with you, not with the peripheral. Mayi chananya yogena bhakti avyabhicharini vivikta desha sevitvam aratirjana sansadi. What you should also have is ananya yogena, mayi bhakti. You should have the utmost love towards the center. You should have the utmost attention towards the center. Now, why Krishna is bringing this point at this time? Because he has already removed where your attention should not be. Your attention should not be with all the peripheral. Where your attention should be is the center. That's what Krishna is clarifying here. Mai chananya yogena. Your attention should be with the utmost focus. It should be towards the center. How should it be? It should be with love. It should be with bhakti. And how should that bhakti be? Avyabhicharin. It should not be like sometimes you go towards the center and then other times you go towards the peripheral. It should be constant towards the center. It should always be towards the center, not going in different directions apart from the center, not going even outside yourself. It should just be inside yourself, only to the knower. At that point, you should not even concentrate on the known. You should only concentrate on the knower. Vivikta desha sevitvam aratirjana sansadi. Now, this point is about yoga, whereby when you have so much going around you, you need some space for yourself. Because when you're always having all this around you, you have this tendency of getting attached to it. When you're on your own, vivikta desha sevitvam, meaning you're in a secluded place, you're in a place where nobody is. What this means is you have the time to contemplate upon yourself. You have the time to look at what your mind is saying or what your swabhava is saying in relation to what the world is saying or how the world views you. And then you also have the time to concentrate upon the knower rather than just concentrate upon the peripheral, because when the peripheral has so many things upon it, you're not able to clarify who the knower is between that. So this is part of yoga. And even in chapter 6 in Dhyana Yoga, we talked about this, that if you do not get a place where you can concentrate, If you cannot get a place where you can be alone and then contemplate upon what is right and what is wrong, then how can you know the truth? If you do not pay attention to subtle things, how can you get nearer to reality? Adhyatma jnana nityatvam tattva jnanartha darshanam etad jnanam iti proktam ajnanam yadatonyatha. So in this verse, Krishna mentions this, that this is jnana, what I've said. Whatever is void of this, or whatever is the opposite of this, is ajnana, is ignorance. And these last things that Krishna talks about are really important. Adhyatma jnana nityatvam, tattva jnanartha darshana. Adhyatma jnana nityatvam meaning adhi atma, in relation to the Atman, in context of the Atman. You have to be nityatvam, always contemplating upon it. Because if you're not always contemplating upon it, all the knowledge that you've gotten right now, when you identify yourself with the peripheral again, you'll go on to the habitual process again. You'll forget about the adhyatma. You'll forget about the Atman totally, if you're not nitya on that aspect. And then tattva jnanartha darshana, always looking for the reality of things, always concentrating upon subtle things that may feel trivial for somebody. Like, for example, what is water? We may think that, oh, we already know the answer, like water is hydrogen and oxygen in the right proportions. Hydrogen, 2 atoms, and 1 atom oxygen. But just look at water. As you look at it, what do you see in water? Not in the way that it is of use to you. Like, for example, when you see water, you'll think about thirst, and the thirst it quenches. Or you'll think about the hydrogen and the oxygen, but leave all that away. Just look at water. What do you know about water? Do you know water essentially what it is, apart from its component parts? Do you know water as it is? And when you ask such subtle questions, we, in context, know that we also have this question, do we know reality truly? Because if we do not know something like water truly as it is, then do we know reality as it is? Or do we know the Atman, or the knower, as he's supposed to be known? So this is what Krishna is saying, that all this is supposed to be with you so that you can separate from the known and be the knower of everything. This is jnana.
Thank you, Yogeshwar. If anybody has any questions or comments, you can either type exclamation point in chat or raise your hand in Zoom. Joe.
Sorry about that. Thank you again for going through this, because I think this actually kind of connects some dots for me as well. So the idea of being steadfast is, of critical importance, because then you can kind of separate yourself from the objects in the world, so that you're going through this process that you're trusting. And that part of being steadfast, as far as I'm understanding it, is this idea of honesty, that honesty with yourself and honesty with your relationship with objects in the world. And so that relates to the idea of persona, and how we develop these personas, and we start to identify ourselves with these roles or whatever else, the periphery in the world. And then once we do that, we're drifting away from our center. And that essentially is I guess it's, in a way, well, it takes us away from the difference between the knowledge and the knower. The one thing I have a question about is this basically focused on the idea of judgment, like how you're judging objects in the world? So in the sense that I'm thinking more in the philosophical terms of judgment, how you're able to, make decisions in the world. I may not have phrased that clearly, but it is. Does it make sense?
According to what I've understood, if I may try to answer your question.
Yes.
Even the judgment that you are making, it's part of, you should also know this, the judgment that you're making is part of the peripheral. It's not part of you. So you, the knower, is still different from the judgment that you're making.
Okay.
So there is the object, and because we have talked about Icha, Dvesha, all those, they're part of the peripheral, not part of the center. What is part of the center is only the knower. Knower doesn't mean, normally when we say knower, we're always thinking about that knowledge is part of the knower. But in Indian philosophy, knower is different, knowledge is a different thing, and the known is different. Those three things are so separate, and they need to be kept separate. When you know that these three things are truly separate, is when you know that any knowledge that you have right now, may it be physical knowledge of any material outside, or may it be any conception of how that material outside is, all that is part of knowledge, and that knowledge is different from the knower.
Thank you for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you, Yogeshwar. Up next, we have either Brian and/or Penny.
Okay, sorry for the delay. Well, two things. Number one, before Joe asked his question and you answered it, I was going to say, wow, I thought this was really things that I could understand. It seemed like you were talking about things that, these ultimate things in practical terms, at least in words and ways that I'm kind of used to. And then, you made this last comment, which I really appreciate too, and I take on board. But wow, that really gives me a lot to think about. So anything that is known is not the knower. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. Anything that can be known or anything that can be thought about is not the knower. The knower is essentially different from all that.
So I guess the one thought I had was that I can know that I am a knower, but I can't know what that knower is.
Yes, so I understand your question here, because what happens is normally we want to know the knower like we know any other object in the world. But what you'll know the knower as is the self. That is who I am. It's like, how do you know who you are? Even though you're in a dark room, there is no light. Even though you can't see any other object, you still can know that I am here. That's an essential thing. Like you don't forget that I am here, however dark it is outside. In the same way, inside, however much peripheral may have come inside your mind, or however many judgments or conceptions that may be there, however many thoughts may be there, it's all part of the peripheral. Yes. The one who knows it And how you'll get to know the knower, how you get to know the Kshetrajna is, this is who I am. It will not be like any other thing. It will not be through a thought. It will not be through a conception, but it will be like, I am. Like, how do you know you are? It's not through a thought that you know I am. It's not through an emotion that you know I am. You just know I am. It's like basic reality. And that's how you'll know that the knower is different from the known or the knowledge. Basic reality. When you separate everything else, only the knower remains. And that will be the reality.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
That's
Thank you. Thank you, Brian, and thank you, Yogesh. For up next, we have, okay, please correct me if I'm wrong, Kirtan?
Yes, that's Kirtan. Yeah, you got it.
Kirtan, right?
Yes, that's right. Kirtan. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Yogesh. I think this has been very deeper and very insightful. One thing what I was thinking about is the qualities that you mentioned. One thing you mentioned, the sthira, where you gave an example of someone digging a 10-meter well, trying to dig multiple of them. What I was thinking is, how do you differentiate sthira, or being consistent or stable, versus being adamant or being, addictive? How do you differentiate those different qualities or characters in order to achieve?
So the one who is sthira will first identify the place in which water is, like in the example of the well. Person who is sthira will first identify where water is and how deep the water is. And then he will dig the well up to that point. What the adamant person will do, he will not think about where water is or how deep it is. He will just start digging anywhere. And what that person will have is, he will not have water at the end, because he will start digging a well in the place where water exists at like 10 kilometers down the ground, that he will never reach. Yeah, that's an adamant person, not knowing what you're doing. Sthira will be a person, he will first contemplate upon, where do I have to reach? What do I have to get? And how long will it take to get there? Then he becomes sthir in that place.
Got it.
Thank you. Thank you, Kirtan, and thank you, Yogeshwar. Next up is Brian.
Yes, I'm trying to understand. I'm thinking more about what has been said. And what I said was, I can know that I am a knower, but I can't know what is. I can't really know that I'm a knower, but I could number one, I could realize through the discussion like we're having here that I am a knower, but I have to experience that I'm a knower. And the way to experience it is to sit quietly and let the wheel spin slowly. And it's an experience. My sense is that it has to be experienced through knowing things.
Yes, that is true. You have to experience it. And that is something that should become reality for you. Like, it is real. It's not like it becomes reality. It is real. But what happens is, we have not yet removed what is unnecessary, like the peripheral or the kshetra, as it's said here in this part of the Gita. We have not removed that, like we have not negated it. Until then, we cannot know who we truly are. So to know who we truly are, we need to negate everything else. Whatever we are not, negate it. And that will happen when you're able to just be alone and contemplate upon what it is. One thing to know in this practice, yes, thought will help to get you through this practice. But any thought you have that this is who I am, also know that that thought is not you. You're still knowing that thought. So the know is still behind that thought. So you continue going behind and behind and behind, trying to know the know there.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. If anyone else has any questions or comments, you can either type exclamation point in chat or raise your hand in Zoom. I'll give it like another 30 seconds. Okay, well, if there are no more questions and comments, I want to say thank you, first of all, to Yogeshwar for the commentary. Everything was great. Thank you. I don't know if Dave's still here, but if David is still here, I don't see him. But I want to thank him for reading. And I want to thank all the participants for participating and making this a great and rich discussion. Thank you to our newcomers. And with that, have a great night and a great weekend, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.